Hi kids, I want to talk to you about the instructions for the assignment called Poem Collage. I'm not going to read these instructions a step at a time because you can read them, but I want to point out things that I think are important for you to notice, and then I want to show you some examples of students doing this well and then students doing it not so well. So here are the key things I want to really draw your attention to in the instructions. The first one is I'm not going to grade the document where you do the work, where you make the collage. I'm going to grade the document where you paste the collage, and this is on Classroom. It'll be above this assignment. There are two reasons for that. One is it's easier for me to grade everybody's if they're all in one location. And two is if you paste your collage into a doc where other students are pasting theirs, it makes it easier for you to quickly see if you've gone really into the wrong direction. I want to point out that you don't have to use Google Docs to do this, but that my instructions are the instructions for how to do it in Google Docs. For the photo of your author, it doesn't have to be a photo of the author at the exact age they wrote the poem, just something that looks reasonable. To figure out how old they were when they wrote the poem, look at the year the poem was written and look at the year they were born and subtract. And so let's say you found out that the author was 55 when she wrote the poem. Just look at pictures of her and pick one that looks like she's about 55. It doesn't have to be exact. If you try Googling picture of Gwendolyn Brooks at age 55, you're not going to get anything because poets just aren't famous enough for that kind of search to work. So just look at images of them and pick an image that looks around that age. For the things you paste into your collage, they need to be physical objects mentioned in the poem. Not things you think of when you read the poem, but actual physical things the poem mentions specifically. And they need to be versions of those things that are probably what the poet had in mind. So if the poet writes about a well in a really realistic way, and the image you put is a cartoon drawing of a well, cartoon drawing is probably not what your poet was hoping you would imagine, and so that wouldn't be good. We'll look at examples in a moment of kids doing this well and kids doing it not so well. Make sure you have the author's name, make sure you have the title. You're going to put a line from the poem or part of a line from the poem that you feel like is at the heart of the poem. It can't be more than 10 words. Kids often want to go over 10 words because that makes the choice easier. They feel like it saves them the trouble of having to use their critical thinking to pick something shorter. But the truth is, every part of your poem is pretty important. So this is actually a really low stakes decision. You could blindly put your finger on any section of your poem and probably find a section that would work well as a quote to put on this collage. So don't stress about this requirement. Make your background color match the emotion that's emerging in the collage. You could also make a photo the background. I didn't say this at the beginning, but I'll say it now. The point of this activity is to basically like force you to visualize what the poet wants you to visualize, right? In writing this poem, the poet is trying to get you to have a series of images in your head. And sometimes this just automatically happens in the reader, but sometimes even when our eyes have gone over the word several times, we're not really taking the time to picture it. So this basically makes you put on your screen the pictures that your poet is trying to put in your mind. Let's look at some examples of kids doing this well and kids doing it, oh, not so well. So here's a poem, In the Well. These images are specific things that are mentioned in the poem. Hands pulling a rope, hands, light, well, dog, news. Those are specific physical objects that the poet mentions. Water, is the background here. Here's a picture of the poet around the age he was when he wrote it. Here's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 word line from the poem. Well done. What are some things that stand out as being not so great? Here, make sure you copy and paste the quote from the poem instead of hand typing it. If you hand type it, you're almost guaranteed to make a mistake. This particular student, I know, hand typed this quote because it says handful of leaves, and actually the poem says leaves, not leaves. So copy and paste. A couple of you have poems where the number of physical objects mentioned in the poem is fewer than 6. And if that's the case, you might choose 2 different photos of the same object. I think Let There Be New Flowering by Lucille Clifton is an example of one of those. Possibly the hand. I think the hand maybe has 6 objects. Might be pushing it. Here's an example of a poem collage that has a couple errors I want you to avoid. One is this student pasted too much of the poem. This is more than 10 words. Here, this is a picture that goes with the feeling of the poem emotionally, but this is not a specific object mentioned in the poem. So when Phyllis Levin wrote End of April, she wasn't trying to get you to picture cute little teddy bear, and it shouldn't be in the collage. The collage should be really faithful to what the poet's trying to get you to picture. Let's see. The rest of these looking pretty good. Here's an example of a student pasting a version that is probably not what the poet had in mind. The poem Not Bad, Dad, Not Bad talks about medals. You wouldn't win any medals, Dad, but you wouldn't drown, I think is the line. Is the poet hoping that we will picture a cartoon guy? There's nothing in the poem to suggest that. So a good picture here instead would have been just a picture of medals. FYI, Not Bad, Dad, Not Bad is another of the poems that perhaps doesn't have 6 objects. Maybe it just has like 5, so you might have to have more than one picture of the same object. You'll see down here in the bottom right, this is also something that's not mentioned in the poem. There's no mention of meditation or yoga. Nobody says take a deep breath. That should not be in there. Okay, I think that's it. If you have any questions, please ask me.